All right, okay. Well, comrades, what we're going to try and do then is do some partly education at our branch meeting, as well as the organisation of work in the mass movement, because it's not an either or really. You can't really work effectively as a communist in the mass movement or in any of the kind of struggles that we're involved in without a kind of understanding of how Marxists analyse the situation, how we understand society, how we direct our work. Lenin said that there can't be a revolution, there can't be a revolutionary movement, and there can't be a revolution without revolutionary theory. So, though we have other means of discussing things with people, a proper study of Marxism, Leninism is important, really. We're going to start discussing tonight what's a bit of a mouthful and sounds like an alien concept to a lot of people, dialectical and historical materialism. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a mouthful, but it is the philosophy on which all Marxist activity, Marxist theory and Marxist intervention in class struggles and leadership and the organisation of specific activity all comes down to this understanding of society. And as I say, it's a Marxist-Leninist philosophy, and we don't call ourselves Marxist and Leninist because of the greatness of the people involved. It's about what their contribution to this process of analysis and theory that we recognise. Marx's analysis, right from back in the 1830s onwards, and Lenin's analysis, which is far more about the development of socialism towards the revolution and through the revolution out the other side and so on. But most Marxist-Leninist leaders have done their best to develop the theory of dialectical and historical materialism. Both Marx and Engels and Lenin and Stalin and Mao Zedong and others have all written about it, and Che Guevara have written about the necessity to understand the world properly, not just guess at it, not just have feelings about it, but to try and understand it. So I was going to ask you a question to start with, which sounds a bit stupid really, but it doesn't sound stupid if people say, well, what is a Marxist? What's a Marxist like? But it sounds considerably more stupid anyway, if you ask the question, what is a molecular biologist? What is a molecular biologist like? Because obviously people are people, and Marxism isn't an orthodoxy. It's not about everybody being the same. This is the way that enemies of Marxism portray it, that we're all going to be fundamentally automatons. We all think the same way, we all do the same things, we dress the same way, we like the same kind of music, we don't break ranks, we never question anything. This is the way that Marxists are represented by the enemies of Marxism. But in fact, all it is, Marxism, is a science of society. And just as there will be molecular scientists who like jazz and others who like classical music, there will be in terms of Marxists as well. And I think we have to reassert right from the beginning that the essence of Marxism and of dialectical materialism is the rejection of orthodoxy. Our slogan has got to be question everything. And whenever we arrive at a truth, things have moved on and we need to question that and move on again. So it's a constant struggle, and a rejuvenation of ideas is what lies at the root of Marxism, not some kind of stale hand of bureaucracy, which is the way it has developed in some societies at particular times, and that's been one of the big faults of the magnificent advances of socialism, but there has been that tendency as well that people have sometimes found orthodoxy the most comfortable way of surviving and not putting themselves under the scrutiny of the working class. And that's what's necessary. The party has to be under the scrutiny of the working class, as well as trying to understand the society itself. So we're not automatons. We are about diversity, and we're about questioning reality. So all Marxists will have different preferences, different personalities, different attitudes, interests, cultures, have different beliefs and lifestyles. But what is important is that we have a consensus around how we understand the world, that those lifestyles and preferences and cultures don't impinge on us to say, well, actually, I think the world has all been preordained for us by a great spirit, by some divine intervention, or it's all preordained by great people, and all we can do is just tinker away at the edges. The essence of dialectical materialism is that mankind and womankind, I don't know what you call it, humanity, can intervene, understand the world is knowable, and we can intervene in it, knowing how it works, in order to try to hasten a change that is already occurring within that society. So we're Marxists, but as Marx said, and is still written on his tomb that we were at the other day for the oration, philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So we're going to be about changing the world, and that's what the fundamentals of dialectical and historical materialism is how change happens. I thought it might be worth just saying a word or two about Marx himself to start with. He studied law, he became a journalist. As a result of his journalistic activities, he became exiled from Germany, from France. He lived in England for most of his life. He was not, though, just a philosopher and a writer and a lawyer, but he was an activist. And he was involved in the struggles right the way through that period of time. He said one time, "I'm not a Marxist," to a group of French Marxists who were dogmatic Marxists. They thought there was very little point in getting involved in the struggle for reforms or improvements in life because it wasn't revolutionary. They weren't saying that they had to overthrow the state all the time. They were getting involved in struggles and in activity in order, they thought there was no point in it. And Marx was saying you need to be involved in those struggles for people to learn from the struggles in order to establish the truth of revolutionary theory. You can't just expect people to jump from one position to another. And he said it can be frustrating, it can be difficult, but it's necessary. And when they said, well, you're letting us down, you should just be saying destroy the state, get rid of the king, let's overturn capitalism, and that's enough. And he said, well, if you're Marxist, I'm not. So he was a creative person as well as a writer. He didn't just expect people to go along with him. He wanted to argue the toss with people all the time. I've written down a few key dates, really, but if you think about that time, it was quite extraordinary, really. He met Engels in London. Engels had written a book about Manchester in 1844, The Condition of the English Working Class. Engels was an interesting character. He met a woman called Mary Burns, who's an Irish woman who lived in Salford in Manchester. Her dad was a dyer. He dyed cloths and skins, and it was a pretty horrible job, the chemicals and all the rest of it. And they were very, very poor. And Engels met this woman and lived with her for 20 years. Actually, she then died, and he took up with her sister, as a matter of fact, Lizzie Burns, and lived with her for 20 years as well, following on. But he came from quite a well-to-do background of manufacturers, but he was committed to that kind of socialism and the analysis of the working class position right from an early stage, before really Marx was writing Communist Manifesto or Capital or anything else. You remember round about the same time, Darwin was publishing Origin of the Species, which absolutely overthrew many preconceptions and ideas about how the world is structured. It challenged divinity, it challenged the kind of idea of intelligent design, which is what they call it now in the States, that superstition of a great creator. It challenged all those things, and I don't think they ever met. That would have been quite a meeting if Karl Marx and Charles Darwin had met. Karl Marx developed the social theory of development, and Darwin developed in the biological theory of development alongside it. And there's something to be learned from that, because Marx argues that they are very similar things. In fact, he concentrates on, at one stage, on looking at how there is natural growth and development in natural things, and compares it to how society develops as a result of its internal developments, not just because somebody's adding something to it, a chemical or whatever, but the natural process of development is what he's talking about in terms of dialectics. He wrote Communist Manifesto in 1848, and Darwin was writing in started writing then, and Das Kapital came out in 1867. So all around this time there was fantastic developments going on. 1871, the revolution in Paris and the Paris Commune, the first time that working people established control, even if it was only for a very short period of time, over the state machine. And the lessons that were learned from that about how you have to be prepared and organised, and all of those things emerged. All those things produced this notion of dialectics and materialism for Marx. So I thought we might start by looking at some of the influences there. In 1849, I think it was, he met Ernest Jones, one of the leaders of the Chartist movement in London. And Ernest Jones, there was two wings to the Chartist movement. One which thought that they had an idea about what a good society would be like, and all they had to do was lobby people and argue with people in the state, and eventually they would be successful because their cause was good enough and their logic was clear enough. Of course, what they did accept, that wing of the Chartists, was that the state knew perfectly well that their argument was logical. It just found it extremely threatening that ordinary working class people should say that they've got a right to vote and determine who the government is. And therefore the hostility towards the Chartists from the state wasn't based on a misunderstanding, it was based on a difference of class interests. Ernest Jones was one of those Chartists who said that their slogan was, their consensus slogan of the Chartists, because they had big arguments about how they could win the suffrage and win the vote, and how they could exert democratic control over the state and MPs and all the rest of it. Their consensus, the thing that brought them together, the groups who said, well, we just need rational argument, the others who said, no, we need force, we need to make this happen, and if they won't let us, well, then we'll have to fight for it, we'll have to defeat them. The consensus slogan that brought them together is one that I think the party should use, which is peaceably if we may, forcibly if we must. And I think it sums up the fact that we don't want social disorder, we don't want deaths, we don't want killings, we don't want violence. But if the other side decide that they're going to try and prevent us from achieving social progress through exactly those things, through repression, through oppression, through violence, we have to be ready to not just knuckle under and give in. All of these things, all of these social movements were coming together to make Marx and Marxists begin to say we need to understand the processes of change in order that we can then analyse the particular situation at a particular time, or a very general situation over a large area, the situation in the world as a whole, and how do we analyse those things. And the first thing that they ran into, which is where I want to really get started tonight, is the question of what is the world? Is the world a series of reactions to what we think? In other words, we sit around this table, come to conclusions about what it is that we want to happen in Britain, and we go out and we say that's the best thing that can possibly happen. We'll make that happen, and then campaign to make it happen. Or is the world about real concrete situations that exist quite outside of our heads, the reality of life, the reality of the struggle to survive, and from that our analysis can decide these are the key issues and the key turning points and the key things that will move the world on and make progress, and that's where we have to focus our energies, not on some ideal utopia that we've got in mind, but on the reality of the world we're living in and how the struggle in that world actually will only be successful if people have looked all round what's happening on each side of every argument, who's responsible for oppression, who's responsible for progress, what forces are dying away, are no longer relevant in the world, and which other forces are up and coming and becoming the most important forces in the world. And by that analysis, deciding what can we do, how can we be involved that will move that process on, that will encourage. This is the battle between what is known as idealism and materialism. He identified it at one of his writings in Marx as utopian socialism and scientific socialism. So utopian socialism, literally what it sounds like it means, a group of people, maybe working class people, but not necessarily. They don't see utopian socialists generally don't see class as being a major significant issue. It's a question of how your brain interprets the world and what you see to be your gain, and you establish a utopian ideal and you go out and campaign for it. And on the other hand, scientific socialism is this notion that there is a science to this, like there's a science to, there's chemistry, like there's physics. There is a science to human relationships, in which you can see how different kinds of societies grow out of the previous conditions, out of historical conditions. So from feudalism, not being able anymore to meet the needs of society, the beginnings of capitalism through manufacture and so on, and transforming the world. That is going to happen, Marx argued, as part of a historic progress. And the job of the working class and working class parties is to intervene in that existing process to make sure that the outcomes are good for working people, as good as they can be, and to shift the world on constantly going forwards. So he counterposed basically what, I don't think he ever called it Marxism, but his philosophy of socialism with wishful thinking. Now, most parties, I think, we could say, coalesce not around an analysis of what the reality is. Most political parties today, they coalesce around a set of ideas and then try to make them happen. So they almost a catechism, a list of things that they think this is a good way of living, and why shouldn't we not live like that? And we want to live like that, and therefore we'll campaign to live like that, but without seeing how do you get from A to B. And what it generally does is mean that people always are campaigning for the highest stage of what you might wish is going to happen, rather than looking at what are the steps between where you are now and where you want to get to, which is the essence of Marxist change. That we do what is necessary. At the moment, what is necessary for a political change in Britain is the election of the Labour Party. Quite personally, I don't see the election of a Labour Party as anywhere near what I want to achieve in the end. But I know that it's a necessary step in that direction, is to campaign for the election of a left Labour Party and then to deal with the struggle that will arise out of that. So it's a practical philosophy, Marxism. It's not about how many angels are there on the head of a pin. It's not all those religious questions that philosophy used to be constricted by and concerned with. It's about how do we get from A to B. Like you want to go into town, you have to get on a bus. You don't go out in order to have a bus ride. You go out to get into town. But without the bus ride, you can't get there. And there's all those kind of commonsensical things that Marxism puts together. So we need to try and understand the real nature of the world and see how we can work as a Communist Party within it to enhance the change and constantly develop it. Shall we stop for a little while?